Dear chess fans, it is round 11 of the Fide Candidates. 4 more rounds to go, and then we know who will be the new challenger of world champion Ding Liren. In this video, we are going to have a look at the game between Praggnanandhaa and Hikaru Nakamura. Both players are on +1, 5.5 out of 10, half a point behind the leaders of the field, Jan Nepomniachtchi and Gukesh. So this is a must-win situation for both players. Let's see what happens in this game. I will show you all the ins and outs, and just make me one favor, and that is hit the subscribe button. Thanks for doing that. Here we go. Praggnanandhaa goes for 1d4, d5, knight f3, knight f6, c4, and here it is Hikaru who drops the first surprise, because there are different ways of how to tackle the Queen's Gambit. You can take it, the Queen's Gambit accepted, the Slav, or protect it with the move e6, the Queen's Gambit declined. But here the move c5 is not something you often see at the highest level, but it is very interesting weapon, and specially prepared by Hikaru for this event. Pawn takes d5, now pawn takes d4, queen takes d4, queen takes d5. We have an absolute symmetrical position. And now normally it should be white who is a bit better in such positions, because after all he is a tempo up. But how to make use of it, that is not easy at all. Knight c3 seems to be a very logical move to break the symmetry by attacking the queen. Queen takes d4, knight takes d4. White's knight is somewhat more actively placed, but Black is going to play this move, a6, preventing a knight ever from coming to the b5 square. Makes a lot of sense. And here, White goes for the move g3, intending to get a bishop to g2 and pose a lot of practical problems along this diagonal. But here it's the move e5, kicking the knight away from the center, knight to b3. And interestingly, this is still played by Hikaru in an earlier game on chess.com against Cuban Grandmaster Albornoz Cabrera. In that game, Hikaru went for this plan. Bishop d7 with the idea of meeting bishop g2 with the move bishop c6. Interesting try. Engines are saying that White is still a bit better there. So here he deviates. He doesn't play bishop d7, but goes for the move knight c6. Active developing of the knight. And after bishop to g2, now interesting idea, as he played here the move a5. That is a remarkable decision, because we just played the move a6 with the idea to keep that square covered, keeping the knight out. But here Black all of a sudden is looking for counterplay to tickle that knight on b3. If the knight will be forced to move, who knows, maybe at some point the knight can come into d4, because the knight on b3 is an important defender of the d4 square. Well, Prag played now critical move, knight to b5, trying to exploit the weakening of that b5 square, threatening a knight fork on c7, winning the rook in the corner. But there is bishop b4 check. So first White got to solve the check, for instance, by playing the move bishop d2. And now king to e7. The knight fork is no longer there, and it seems like Black is absolutely all right here, as he is just one move away from completing its development by getting the bishop into the game, connecting the rooks. And what can White do in the meantime? Well, it should also be clear to you guys that taking on b4 is not a very attractive option. Black is going to recapture with a pawn, and there is this sort of long-term pressure against that backward pawn on the a file. Anyway, therefore, White played here the move a3, attacking the bishop. Bishop takes d2, knight takes d2. And now Black goes for the move a4. Interesting idea, so that the knight will never be supported by a white pawn anytime soon. Knight comes into c4. So there are some weak squares. Maybe White is able to make use of that. But with bishop e6, you're attacking the knight on c4. White goes for rook c1. Getting the rook into play, defending the knight. And still there are all sorts of ideas, including knight c7, including knight b6. But rook a6 is a great idea. It should be clear also here, once again, that something like knight c7 is not much of a problem. You can hit the knight and you can hit with the knight the bishop and the rook. But there's always bishop takes c4 first, and if you take on a6, it's bishop takes. You get 2 pieces for the rook. So, and well, if you do take on c4 with a rook, I guess that there is just rook b6 with a nice activation of the rook along the b file. Anyway, after rook a6, castling kingside was played. Rook d8 is there, so knight c7 is still not much of an issue. But now white has to be very careful, because black also has plans at some point, for instance, to take on c4 and then try to enter with a rook on the second rank, winning one of these pawns, either on b2 or e2. Knight e3 is played. And well, here knight c7 becomes a serious idea, because black no longer has bishop takes c4. So the rook comes into a5, hitting that knight on b5. And well, one key point is that if now knight c7 would be played, then you do get access to the d4 square. Knight d4, creating a lot of counterplay in the center, threatening to take on e2, winning the exchange. So instead of playing that move knight c7, white decided here to take first on c6 with the bishop, defending the knight, so black is forced to take back. And of course, if you do take the pawn, the knight will be taken. So that is not a good plan. Instead, the knight went back to c3. And probably white was thinking, okay, I no longer have my bishop, but at least I've managed to create a weak pawn on the c file. It's not a problem that this light squared bishop is no more on the board. But, okay, this bishop is also quite a good piece. You wish you could play rook d2 now to put pressure here, but there is still rook c2 defending along the second rank. So instead, white got to deal now with bishop b3. This is a good move, covering both the c2 square, so the rook cannot come to the second rank, while also the bishop covers the d1 square. So here, once again, there are some issues. Probably rook d2 is coming very soon. Knight b1, attacking the pawn on c6. Rook a6 therefore played, defending the pawn. And, well, this bishop, it's absolutely a nuisance. It's very difficult to activate your rooks because of that. And also, when the rook from f1 cannot be activated, the king on g1 remains a bit out of play. But white is trying here to move f4. I think the idea is that if you do take, white probably is going to take with a rook to activate a rook in this way. And therefore, black keeps the position closed with the move e4. Ambitious move. And you can see that initially, black opted for this system with the idea to try to equalize. But now there are imbalances in the structure, bishop versus knight, a lot of piece activity. Potentially black's king is also better placed than white's king. And, well, there's still something to play for in this queenless middle game. I like this move, rook c5, with the idea to go rook fc1 and connect the rooks. Probably bring the king over to e1 at some point, and when the king is on e1, you can get your knight back into the game. But king f2 was played right away. Now the rook comes to b6. And, well, know that knight f5 is never a big issue. If you do that with the idea to fork the king and pawn, there is king f8 and the game goes on. But knight c3 was played now. Black goes for g6 anyway to just cover the square, and who knows, you want to expand later on. Rook to b1, so indirectly anticipating against these kind of threats. Knight comes to d5. And here white has to make an important decision, because you never really want to take on d5. It runs into c takes d5, followed by d4 to attack the knight. And if you can get in your pawn to d3 and then d2, you have clear ideas to promote a pawn, as it can count on the support of the rooks and the bishop. So what should white do instead? Well, I tend to think here that rook fc1 is the way to play to keep that pawn defended. And if you, for instance, play f5, Now knight c to d1. I think that is the way to untangle. Following it up by knight c4 and getting in the other knight to e3. That seems to be a way to try to untangle your pieces. But Pragg played differently. He went for rook b to c1. There follows the move f5. And still this this rook on f1 is sort of out of play. And it's not clear how you're going to activate it any time soon, while also the pawn on b2 remains a source of problems for white. So white can no longer really wait. Maybe you should wait calmly here with something like h3 and see what black is going to do in the next few moves. But here, Pragg opens up the game with the move g4. He's a calculator. He likes to look for these sort of complications. He trusts on his calculation abilities. But I'm not sure this is the best way of playing. Now after f takes g4, knight takes g4, knight takes f4. Black is a pawn up. And well, there are ideas now to regain the pawn on e4. First of all, the move which was not played in the game, knight takes e4, can just be met very strongly by rook to f8, setting up some huge threats against the king. If the king goes away, it's knight takes e2, for instance. If the king goes to e1, let me show you this. Then it's knight g2 check. If king goes to d2, it's rook d8. The king will be pushed to the c file, but then all these moves come with tempo. Bishop e6 hitting the knight. If knight goes away, you have rook b3 check. King c2, and then at the end it's knight e3. And black is winning quite a lot of material. So this is quite a good example why the opening of the position was probably not helping white that much. There are still ways to try to play it safe. I guess that something like king e1 is the best option, trying to hide here with your king. But Pragg went for the move king to e3, which is a double attack, but there is knight to d5 check. White can take the pawn on e4, which is what he did in the game. Also, knight takes d5 is an option, but after bishop takes d5, this bishop guards these two pawns. Rook b3 is coming next, or even simply take the pawn on b2. So that will probably become a second pawn for black. So white went for the move king takes e4. And look at this king. It's good piece for an upcoming endgame, but it's not really an endgame yet. There are still quite a number of pieces on the board, and for instance, with a move like c5, black is just about to bring that rook over to e6 and launch a kingside attack. I think this is very dangerous for white. But instead, there followed knight takes c3 first, which is also a good move. Just that if you take with a rook, there is bishop d5 check, defending the pawn. And next you're going to take on b2. And well, this is just much better for black. Probably even winning. But it's still a game. In any case, Pragg almost instantly recaptured with the b pawn. But now c5 is played anyway, with this idea of getting the rook over to e6. Now, position becomes more and more problematic. There's this attack going on against the white king. White played rook f4, trying to stabilize the situation by defending the knight. But here, black doesn't go for rook e6, because then the king is able to get back in time. A much better move here is the check on d5, bishop d5. If the king goes to e5, it is checkmate in one. So that's not recommendable. King e3 is played. And now you really want to go for rook e6. But it's much better to insert this great move h5 to tickle the knight. The knight is really badly placed. And for instance, if it goes to e5, well, there is a rook to e6 and the knight will be lost. If you give a check on f7, king d6, the knight can no longer be defended. So instead, after h5, white tried here this move, c4, counterattacking the bishop. And of course, you don't want to trade off the knight for the bishop. That is leading to an unclear rook endgame with good chances to survive. But instead, Hikaru played a very pragmatic move by going back with the bishop to a8, keeping that great bishop on the board, which still takes away a lot of squares from the white king. Also the rook covers the d-file, so the king doesn't have many squares. Once again, if knight e5, it's rook e6, and you're going to win the knight on e5 next. If you do play knight f2, for instance, well, there is a rook e6 check. The king can't go anywhere. Knight e4, rook d4 with a triple attack against the knight on e4. Black is winning a piece once again. So there's not much of a choice, but the knight went to the only square h6. Now it's offside. It's almost trapped. And, well, you gotta just be careful that the knight is not able to return into the game. Rook f7, knight f7 are these ideas, but rook e6 check forces the king to go to f2. And now, before rook f7 can be played, just rook f6. The knight is stranded. Rooks are going to be exchanged. King g3, rook h8. So here you see the knight is almost gone. Rook takes f6, king takes f6, rook f1 check. Pretty much forced. Now, don't play king g5 because of knight f7. But of course, Hikaru is not going to fall for such a cheapo. There is king g7 instead. And now the knight is definitely lost. Because if you do play knight f7, there is rook f8. And if the knight moves, the rook on f1 will be taken. That is the main point of black's play. So white has to do something instead. He sacrificed the knight on f5, getting a number of pawns for it, but it's not going to be enough. There are various ways of playing, including just to give up the pawn on c5. Well, Hikaru said, okay, I'm going to play rook c8 to defend the pawn. You can capture the pawn on h5, but now with the move bishop b7, he's going after the pawn on c4. That is also a very nice technique. King f4, bishop a6, king e5. Tricky move still, because if you take the pawn on c4, king d6, you can take on e2. And if you take on c5, what you shouldn't do is rook takes rook. Because then the only thing white needs to do is get back into the corner. And black has the wrong colored bishop. This is a theoretical draw. So this is the reason why Pragg is still playing on with a minus piece. Anyway, there's no need to take yet on c4. King g6 is a very good move to attack the rook, forcing the rook to go to h4, and now it's king g5, great move, and the rook on h4 is no longer able to keep the pawn defended. In case of rook f4, it's rook e8 check, and the king is forced to give up the protection of the rook. If you do play rook e4, it's the same story. It is rook e8 check, king d5, and now after bishop b7, white is even going to lose its rook on the next move. So all these lines, they show that the rook got to leave the fourth rank. Rook h3 was played. Bishop takes c4. And now black does have a very powerful passed pawn. Rook g3, check. King h6, e4 played. Rook c6 guarding the sixth rank so that a white pawn is never able to cross it. Rook and bishop are controlling the e6 square. King f5, bishop to f7. King e5 back, what else to do? c4 played. Black is about to run with the pawn, so the king comes back. You do give a check on d6. In case of king c3, there will be rook b6 followed by rook to b3. And you do force the exchange of rooks, otherwise the pawn on a3 is going to be lost. So Pragg played king c5. Now it's rook d3. Obviously, rooks cannot be exchanged because the c pawn becomes a d pawn and will just be promoted next. King b4 played. And now I like the way Nakamura finishes off the game here with rook b3 check. Now if you do take on b3, you just take back with your pawn and it's going to be an easy win. White's pawns are absolutely not dangerous. White decided to take the pawn on a4, but after rook takes g3, Pragg resigned, because if you do take back with your pawn, there is the move c3, and look at this. This bishop is preventing the king from getting back, so the pawn is out of reach. Next there will be c2, c1 queen, and of course it's not a difficult task to give checkmate with a queen only. So very important victory for Hikaru Nakamura, who is winning his second game in a row, and that means that he is back at the very top. What the standings are, I'm going to tell you later. I'm going to also recap another critical game between tournament leader Jan Nepomniachtchi and Fide. So stay tuned for that. And in any case, we have 3 more very exciting games to come. So stay tuned for all the action, and it's all covered on this YouTube channel, Robert Ristje. So please come back, hit the subscribe button, give it a like, let me know what you think of this game, and we will stay in touch with each other. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.